something terrible has happened to men in the wake of the sexual revolution.
The destruction of men in the West is the great story of the last 40 years.
Since men lost their clear identity as breadwinners in the 1960s, they become increasingly single, alienated, and driven to self-termination. At the same time, educational and economic performance has declined.
There is a problem right now with boys and men, and one of the sources of that problem is we don't have a new script for masculinity. We've torn up the old one, the breadwinning one, we haven't replaced it.
For decades, men have needed a positive message to map a strange new world that's threatened to make them culturally redundant, but our institutions have instead contrived to discourage men from their infancy.
There's a surprising amount of hostility towards boys in this society. To put it bluntly, boys are politically incorrect.
Their play preferences are stymied in elementary school. They're taught nonstop from the time they enter school that the entire masculine enterprise is oppressively patriarchal and evil in its essence, derived as it is from power. Even the American Psychological Association apparently agrees with that now. Their idiot report on so-called toxic masculinity.
Men learn to play passive early, as tales of toxic masculinity thrive at almost every level of academia.
Public school education has become completely permeated by this kind of anti-male propaganda.
Girls experience the education system quite differently. They're trusted and supported, and sold the narrative that men enslaved women as a group throughout history. Consequently, they walk away in their early 20s, armed with the bold and empowering message that their time has finally arrived, and they readily meet the world with agency and drive.
Data points saying that women are more likely to move than men in search of opportunity. More likely to go abroad, more likely to study abroad, more likely to volunteer for AmeriCorps, more likely to go for the Peace Corps, more likely to be the first to buy their own home, less likely to be living at home with their parents in their 20s.
But is it so surprising that men fail to keep pace when the message for them goes something like,
"You're terrible. Your ambition is toxic. Your assertiveness makes the world a worse place. So be passive, go sit in front of a screen, consume some stuff, entertain some stuff, and be androgynous." That's the message that they send to men.
The pervasiveness of the idea that maleness is toxic and oppressive and in need of suppression has led to the normalization of misandry in the mainstream in recent years.
Hi everybody, it's Janae, and I am here with a video talking about how much I hate men and why I hate men. I think men are disgusting.
We need to kill all men. I am sick of being a baby factory that produces more men that will just, in the future, subjugate me.
The kill all men hashtag is actually being shown all over TikTok. I think when I first looked at it, it had about 7 million views on the videos that use the hashtag kill all men.
The hashtag men are trash has ignited a social media storm. It has split men and women even beyond the boundaries of social media.
Men are no longer men. Quite frankly, I think they're trash all over this country.
Honestly, the coronavirus isn't killing men fast enough.
This is unacceptable. Hashtag men's rights. Hashtag
men's rights to go to war and die.
I can't even say it. Men.
At the next opportunity for any bill that's appropriate, I might actually put in an amendment to create a curfew for men on the streets after 6 p.m, which I feel would make women a lot safer, and discrimination of all kinds would be lessened.
We have to stop demonizing people and realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them to the right.
Society has told men to fuck off, and many have, turning in a state of demoralisation to various forms of escapism instead of meaningful pursuits. The checkout is quite alarming and can be seen everywhere, most notably of late in the data emerging from the Pew Research Center.
Nearly half of all young adults are single, 34% of women, and a whopping 63% of men.
Wow. 30% of men haven't had sex in the last year. 50% of men say that they are not looking for a relationship.
When they say aren't looking for a relationship, do they mean I'm not looking for a woman or I'm not looking for commitment?
And not actively pursuing any kind of interaction with women.
Oh shit.
Societal factors say it's not a problem. Technology anesthetizes your brain better than ever before. Economically, you likely don't have a chance in hell at buying a house or vastly outpacing any female in the workplace based on your average wages. Why bother? Just do drugs, play games.
This rapid retreat of testosterone-laden young men feels more like the premise of an eerie science fiction story than life itself. But here we are, with evidence to disprove the belief conservative men held in the 1970s that the emancipation of women would eventually lead to a Mad Max-style apocalypse where men would tear down society in response to the pain of their displacement. In reality, the opposite has happened.
As opposed to us going out with a bang, we're going out with a fizzle. And the sort of rhetoric that I hear online from men is a lot less, I'm going to go out and do something about this. It is a lot more, I'm going to retreat into me, just hold on tight, boys, the sex robots are coming soon. These are non-ironic comments that I see on the internet.
Men are lost like never before, and few seem to care, as society is increasingly captured by an ideology that doesn't have their best interests at heart.
I started off thinking that this was an oversight. I thought that this is because people have overlooked something. And then I realized, no, they haven't overlooked anything. This is intentional. They intend this. This is a constructed part of our culture to demonize men and to banish men and to make men obsolescent.
Before the 1960s, no confusion existed about who men were and what they were wired to do in society.
Men are wired to provide, protect, defend, and care for women and children.
And the thing that most men did for virtually all of human history was get married, have kids, protect and defend your wife and kids. That was the role, and you were trained to do this from the time that you were a small kid.
But with the sexual revolution of the 1960s and the later expansion of the welfare state, man's place in the world, defined by hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary history as protector and provider, was sharply interrupted. No longer so essential to women and children, and devoid of an inbuilt social role, men were forced to grapple with the meaning of manhood.
Large numbers of men were feeling a need for a map and guidance for how to be a man in a new world.
But an inspiring vision for men's role in the new world never arrived. Instead, an insidious war on men was initiated after radical intellectuals invaded the education system in the 1960s and 70s.
A lot of radicals that came out of the late 60s, 70s went into the universities. It was the one institution that you could take your radical politics and find a home there. They were more radical than the liberal professors who hired them. As the older scholars retired, and the young radicals gained a foothold in many departments. I mean, certainly women's studies, they were always there. But even in political science departments, history departments, certainly English departments, they would start hiring their own. And if you came in and appeared to be conservative or even moderate, you wouldn't get hired. So we have a lot of teachers who were trained in left orthodoxy going into our junior high schools and high schools. So you have had a transformation of the educational system.
Despite the introduction of the Equal Pay Act of 1963, the loosening of divorce and abortion laws, and the fact that more women than men have been admitted into undergraduate programs since 1982, the radicals within the education system insisted that women remained hostage to a patriarchy constructed to oppress them personally and politically.
What I have against politics as it exists is the male supremacy built into it.
Was there male supremacy in the 1980s in England when Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister?
Yes.
You're making a case that there is male supremacy when 54% of the votes are female.
Yes.
Are those 53 or 54% of the electorate who vote where they just don't quite get it?
Voting doesn't determine social power. I mean, there's a million other ways. You can vote any way you want and still get raped. For the most part, men are treating women unequally and are benefiting from it.
So long as bad men existed and the patriarchy remained intact, a revolution was an urgent necessity, they said. So as revolutionary movements often do, they targeted children, the boys who threatened to grow into oppressive patriarchs.
This is not because teachers and education theorists and feminists dislike boys. They sincerely believe that something is seriously wrong with young men in America. And a growing number of experts now claim that the nation's boys as a group are disturbed, depressed, too undomesticated, too competitive, far too violent, and for that reason, in need of being re-socialized in the direction of femininity. This movement at Harvard University, led by Carol Gilligan, William Pollack, gender equity experts in various departments of education, this is not about helping boys academically. This is a movement, as they say, to sort of rescue boys from their maleness.
The scheme to re-socialize boys and generate the most female-friendly environments possible must account in part for the fact that boys are universally failing at every level of the school system.
If it's happening everywhere and every level, it's not the kid, right? It's not Chris's problem in secondary school in a particular education system, or my son's problem in the US K-12. It's a structural problem with the education system that's just not male-friendly enough.
It's the same story at colleges and universities, where the mission to rescue boys from their oppressive maleness continues.
Can you imagine being a young man on campus today? They're taught their masculinity is a pathology in need of a cure. They're monitored, they're policed and demonized.
And neutered. Everything's been stripped off of them. They've been made to feel ashamed of anything virile. They have nothing to identify with.
This is precisely why so many young men were so hungry for a message like Jordan Peterson's when he rose to fame in 2016. Speaking about the appeal of his message, Peterson said,
"There are just a lot of people, I would say, who are sick and tired of having their desire to move forward in the world and to achieve something and to take their place as adult males, let's say, who are under the weight of accusations that their ambition and forthrightness is a manifestation of something that's fundamentally tyrannical. It's not doing anyone any good, and it's also not true. It's really a terrible thing to do to young men. That's why they're bailing out of universities like mad. It's an unhospitable place, and it's unhospitable precisely because of this doctrine. Said that throughout history, the fundamental relationship between men and women was one of power, essentially slavery. It's like, fine, believe it if you want."
It is true, as Peterson says, the men are now rapidly bailing out of the universities.
There's like a 60-40 divide in schools right now, where women are 60% of the new graduates. That's unbelievably tipped on the other side of where it was before.
The trend worsened during the pandemic. College enrollment as a whole declined in 2020, but that decline was 7 times greater for male than for female students. Fucking wild.
And you think, well, what's the problem with that? Well, when it was 40-60 female to male, we decided to do something about it with Title IX and affirmative action, and we leveled up women. Now that it's 40-60, or you could even argue 33-66 in terms of graduation because men drop out, the question is, well, are we concerned now?
I had a school administrator email me one time. He's like, the idea that you could even reach that topic and have that conversation, like maybe we need like affirmative action for men in schools, or maybe we need to start looking at that. That's like an inconceivable conversation. You can never even begin to have it.
Because the moment you're seen as quote unquote pro young man, the natural assumption is that means you're anti-women.
It's a zero-sum game for the education system, which sends its students out into the world, primed to impact influential industries with the kind of anti-male propaganda they've been sold in schools. We see evidence of this in the journalism of outlets like the New York Times and the advertisements of companies like Gillette that promote messages of toxic masculinity. We see it in the reports of psychological associations advising clinicians to watch out for so-called negative masculine ideals such as stoicism, heterosexism, and self-sufficient attitudes. We see it in the prevalence of diversity training everywhere, suggesting, among other things, that men would be liable to employ sexism and racism at every turn if left unchecked. We see it in the sciences, where scientists now embrace the radical feminist notion that biological sex is a patriarchal social construct or a spectrum.
It's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex, and I'm a historian of medicine. I can unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't. So that's a very popular misconception.
Every legitimate scientist knows that this is absolute nonsense, but ideologues get away with denying biological facts by scaring professionals into submission.
Because of the animosity that some activists have for legitimate scientific experts in the field don't want to say anything that's going to go against particular narratives because they know they're going to pay a heavy price for that. In some cases, they will be fired, they have their reputations ruined, activists will go after their families. Like, there's no boundaries in terms of where the animosity ends.
But the subversion of science can't be reduced to the threat of activism. Institutions and the bureaucrats within them are critical players in this game.
The collaboration of the bureaucratic machinery with it has to do with the assault on masculinity. Everything's all about terminating men and defining men out of existence. Masculinity is by definition toxic. Okay? Masculinity doesn't exist. You see, this is the proof of it.
Men in the concept of masculinity have taken such a battering that countless confused and demoralized men now think, fuck it, what's the point?
More men are finding out, hey, you know what? No matter what I do, it seems I'm being blamed as a bad guy. I'm just going to start isolating and pulling out of society.
Unfortunately, pulling out of society often means withdrawing from everything that can aid the creation of a meaningful life, starting with a job of some kind.
From 1965 to our conversation today, it's been basically a straight line out of the workforce. And It's eerie if you track this on a graph or a piece of paper.
Why lift a load if there's nothing in it for you? That's a thing that we're doing to men that's a very bad idea, and to boys. It's like, you're pathological and oppressive. It's like, fine then, why the hell am I going to play? If that's the situation, if I get no credit for bearing responsibility, you could bloody well be sure I'm not going to bear any. But then, your life is useless and meaningless, and you're full of self-contempt and nihilism, and that's not good.
It's not good, but that's where so many men are, and patterns of addiction shield them from facing the fact that their lives lack the meaning necessary to sustain them, with drugs, video games, social media, and adult content among the most common forms of self-medication and escapism. Forgetting oneself takes precedence over the arduous task of making meaning in a world that needs and wants men less than ever. And vital human connections, from friendships to sexual partners, are lost or never found.
A stunning trove of new data from the Pew Research Group highlights just how big of a problem we have, one that soon could reach a total point of no return. 63% of young men today, between the ages of 18 to 29, report being single. That is compared to 34% of young women.
If you think about it, it's so wild. That is a 2-to-1 male to woman gender ratio in the dating scene for young people. If this is not hitting you, with 63% of men, how does that happen? How are there half the amount of single women as there are single men in this age bracket? It's actually wild.
Increasingly desperate and marginalized men turn to websites like TikTok and OnlyFans to simp for crumbs of acknowledgement, or sign up to AI companion apps like Replica. Until recently, Replica was a free application designed to bond its users with AI chatbots, but for £70 a year, you could access its erotic roleplay features. Many of Replica's users melted earlier this year when its creators decided to dispense with those features.
The reaction from the community was like, you took away my girlfriend.
Oh, Jesus
Like, you took
Christ.
away my, partner. These people had legitimately bonded with a bot.
AI shuts down erotic roleplay community, shares suicide prevention resources over loss. Oh my goodness.
It's pretty dystopian, man.
This is how far men have fallen, from purposeful providers and protectors of the old world to invisible features of a brave new one, where dignity is lost and death comes early.
Right now, young men commit suicide at 4 times. Yes, 4 times the rate of younger women. Males make up nearly 80% of all suicides in the entire United States. How is that not the blaring headline across all outlets? Nobody wants to talk about this. They would rather ignore it completely or deny that it's even a problem.
The data doesn't lie. It tells us that this society, that supposedly privileges men at the expense of women, is far more likely to drive men to unbearable depths of despair.
I looked at their work on suicide, and one of the studies that really stopped me in my tracks, honestly, and it's a moment where you stop being a scholar and you just become a human being. This work by Fiona Shand looked at the words that men used to describe themselves before suicide, and the 2 most commonly used words by those men were useless and worthless. We cannot create a society which is more gender equal, which I fully support, but which also makes so many men feel like they're of no use anymore. They're worthless now. Thanks guys, we got it from here, is not a great message. And so we've got to find a way to get through this messy situation we're in now so that there's a positive script for men that is compatible with this new world of economic equality. Because it's not going away. We're not going back to a world where women were economically dependent on men, except within families by choice.
And those families will continue to be few and far between, because the economic realities of the day make it impossible for most women to stay at home, even if they want to. The cost of living has continued to soar, and most men can't afford to support a household single-handedly. That aside, it's hard to believe that the empowering script for men that people like Richard Reeves are calling for will be served in the coming years. Our leaders and institutions clearly have other ideas. The best we have are the messages of duty and accountability put forward by the likes of Jordan Peterson.
Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look at, you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, yeah, well, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there.